Welcome. In this video, we will be talking about the different layers of the skin and their functions. So we can break up the skin mainly into 3 different sections. And the first one is the epidermis, the outermost layer of our skin. So if you touch your skin right now, you're touching the epidermis. And then the second layer is going to be the dermis, which has 2 layers. The papillary layer, which is touching the epidermis directly. And then there is also the reticular layer, which is underneath the papillary layer. And the reticular layer is where we have hair follicles originating from, blood vessels, and this is also where sweat glands originate from. And finally, all the way down here at the bottom, the innermost layer of our skin is the hypodermis. You can think of hypo as being less or down. So hypo means the lowest skin layer. So the hypodermis is what connects our skin to the rest of the body. It's connecting our skin to the rest of the body, connecting everything together. So naturally, it is composed of a large amount of connective tissue. Now, the epidermis itself is broken into multiple layers as well. And those are the stratum corneum, stratum luciderm, stratum spinosum, and finally the stratum basale, or however that's pronounced. So the way that I learned how to memorize this is by a mnemonic device. Come, let's get, oops, we forgot one. So before spinosum, we should be having the granulosum. So the stratum granulosum. So the G is for get. Come, let's get sunburned. So this is a mnemonic that you can memorize the layers of the epidermis. And this mnemonic is listed from outermost, which is the corneum, to innermost. So if we write this in terms of how it is oriented regarding the epidermis, first we have the corneum, then we have the luciderm, then we have granulosum, then we have spinosum, then we have basal. So the corneum, you can think of this layer, since it's the outermost one, it's the one that's right beneath the epidermis. It is going to protect our skin, and it's going to protect it from penetration and abrasions. So its main duty, try to remember it like corneum is on the outermost, so it is probably going to be exposed to most of the environment. So it's going to protect our skin from penetration and abrasions. And then directly below that, we have the luciderm. The way I like to remember it is the L in lucidum is the L in the word palm. So if you take a look at your palm right now, you can notice that your palm has very thick skin. There's no hair on your palm. There's no hair follicles originating in that area. So luciderm, that is skin that it's very thick skin, and it is hairless. So you can imagine that luciderm is found only in areas where you have thick and hairless skin. Granulosum is where there are dead keratinocytes. So if you know what keratinocytes are, these are basically hair cells. They can also help make up your nails, but we're mostly concerned with hair in this situation. So the granulosum is where you have dead hair cells. And one way I like to remember it is granule sounds like small little grains You can imagine those little grains being the dead keratinocytes. And then beneath that, we have the spinosum. So the spinosum contains a type of cell called Langerhans cells. And these cells, this is basically a synonym for tissue-resident macrophages. So macrophages have the main function of basically clearing up debris in the body, and they're a part of our innate immune system. They will just gobble up any intruders that they see in the body, and they're also very important in the brain as well, as they do a lot of neuron monitoring and are able to clean up any of the materials that are left over in the brain. So macrophages are a type of phagocyte, and tissue-resident macrophages are called Langerhans cells, and they're found in the stratum spinosum. So one way I like to remember it is that the spinosum kind of sounds like spider. So I like to think of Spider-Man. So spider, SPI, is kind of like the SPI in spinosum. And the M in man, MA in man, is going to stand for macrophage. So that's a way that you can remember that. And finally, it's squeezed in over here, but we have the stratum basale. And this is basically where we have keratinocytes. So this is where stem cells are converted into keratinocytes, which are hair cells. One way I like to remember it, this is very silly, but I like to think that the B in basale stands for Beyonce, and we all know Beyonce has great hair. So that's how I remember that the stratum basale has the keratinocytes in it. So those are the main layers of the epidermis. And then beneath it, we already discussed the layers of the dermis, the papillary layer, which is immediately touching the epidermis above it, and then the reticular layer where hair follicles, blood vessels, and sweat glands will originate. Now, the dermis also houses a bunch of different types of cells, and we will discuss some of them. So these are types of cells that are involved in our basic sensation of the skin. So the first type that we will go over are Merkel cells. And these cells are involved in deep pressure and texture sensation. We also have free nerve endings here. And this is basically involved in the control of pain and temperature. We also have something called the Pacinian corpuscle. And this is involved with, again, deep pressure, just like Merkel cells, but it is also involved in the sensation of vibrations. And then we also have the Meissner corpuscles. This has to do with light touch sensation. And the last one that we'll be discussing today are Ruffini endings. And this has to do with the response to the sensation of stretching. So now, these are a lot of different types of cells, and it's very easy to get these confused. So I will share some mnemonics that I made up in order to understand these a little better, or some of these a little better. But I recommend that you try to make your own mnemonic so it sticks in your brain a little better. So let's start with Merkel cells. So when I see Merkel, it reminds me of Markle. So that's making me think of Meghan Markle. And again, Meghan Markle has great hair. Her hair has a great texture. And that great texture probably makes it have a very deep pressure. When you press her hair, it's probably really floofy and really nice. Like, I know that doesn't really make sense, but it's just an easy way to remember it by thinking of the deep pressure and texture of Meghan Markle's hair. Free nerve endings, I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Every time you see nerve endings, you should be thinking of pain. Pacinian corpuscles, we can think of the P standing for pressure again. We can also think of Pacinian as a vice president, or VP, where the V is going to stand for vibrations and the P is going to stand for pressure and Pacinian. So that's how you can remember that. Meisner, a way I like to remember this one is I think of Messi, who is a very world famous soccer player. And I like to think of him lightly kicking, just lightly touching a soccer ball. So Meisner corpuscles involve light touch. And Ruffini endings, this is my favorite mnemonic. I like to think of Ruffini as Ruffalo, Ruff, Ruff. And I like to imagine Mark Ruffalo doing a bunch of stretches before he works out. So we have Mark Ruffalo doing stretches, so that's how we can associate Ruffini endings with responding to the sensation of stretching. So that's basically it. Those are the main layers of the skin, some cells that they encompass, and what their main functions are. I hope some of the mnemonics that we talked about were helpful, and I hope to see you in the next video.